Hey everybody, this is Josh, and I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the site that I designed for Web Publishing One. What I did was I had the pleasure and the honor of designing a website for my church's youth ministry. And really, the purpose of this website was twofold. The first is I needed to create a dynamic and interesting website for the youth ministry at Faith Family Church. And this site was actually and is actually going to be used for the next 12 to 18 months until most likely I design a new one. The second purpose was to give prospective visitors and their parents a basic idea of what Escape Youth Ministry is and what it is all about. So those are the two purposes that this website needed to and does serve. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the process that I went through in designing this website, because as a professional web designer, I feel like I could probably offer a little insight into what we do where I work. The first thing I did was I met with the head pastor of the church and his wife and the head business administrator and the head of the youth ministry, and I talked to them about the direction they wanted the site to go in and what they wanted it to look like. And some of the some questions that I asked them are pretty simple. The first question that I asked him is, what is the personality of the website that you want? Now that sounds really dumb, but they were really able to give me some good information. Like they said they wanted a happy website, but a website that was very modern. They said that they wanted a website that spoke truth and a website that allowed them to convey what that youth ministry is all about. And if you've ever been to this youth ministry, and you'll be able to see some pictures when we go to the website, you can see that it really does. The personality of the website matches the personality of the youth ministry really well. Another question I ask is, who is the main competition? That's a question we ask a lot of businesses, but it was a good question to ask the church because they were able to give me an idea of what their competitors were doing, what their competitors offered that they wanted to offer. Here are the churches that are like us in our area, and here's what they offer in terms of an interactive web experience, and this is what we'd like to offer. So that's what that question's for. The next question I asked was, what do you offer that is better than them? And they were able to highlight some things that Escape Youth Ministry had going for it that the other youth ministries in the city maybe don't have or don't do as well. And so I was able to highlight those specific positives on the website. And then the fourth question I asked is, what is the call to action that you want to highlight? This one's especially important for businesses, but it was important here too, because if you put up a website with no call to action, there's not really any purpose to that website. And so I asked them simply, what is the call to action that you want to highlight? And this is what they said. They want to tell people that this is what Escape Youth Ministry is and that they need to come to see it themselves. And so that's really what the call to action is on the site: come to Escape Youth Ministry. I dove right into the site. Photoshop is my tool of choice when it comes to designing websites. I know some people use GIMP, some people use Illustrator. I actually know a couple people who still use Fireworks to design websites, but Photoshop is my tool of choice. I think it's one of the most powerful programs that you can buy. It works real well for web design. It's got a lot of tools since it is pixel based, just like the web is. It's raster images. It's a very functional tool for the web. In the future, watch out, because the entire internet's going to something called SVG, or scalable vector graphics, and at that point everything will need to be created with the pen or the shape tool in Photoshop or Illustrator. And so there's a shift happening in the web right now, and so watch in 5 years everyone will have moved off Photoshop, including myself, to Illustrator. Sometimes at work we do a functional mock-up, and that's what I did. That's what I did not do here. If there is a lot of JavaScript or Flash animation, or if there's a ton of server-side functionality that can't be explained through words and pictures, we'll do a functional mock-up, which is a sort of rough and ugly but functional version of the website to show the customer exactly what we're talking about. But in this case, I didn't need to. Simply a picture and a 2-minute description of what I meant by the JavaScript animations was enough to explain to them what I was going to do on the site. And when I gave them mock-ups to approve, I gave them a mock-up of both the home page and interior pages. After a few minor rounds of changes, the designs had been approved, and I went to cutting them up and putting them together in HTML. And my habit really is to cut apart the PSD at the same time that I'm putting the page together. So I'll cut out the logo and I'll stick it on the page, and then I'll cut out the background, I'll stick it behind the logo. And then after I have that page put together in a rough way, I'll add the JavaScript, Flash, server-side functionality, or any other thing that the page needs after the page is put together. So here's what my mock-up looks like. This is the mock-up that I created for the site in Photoshop. As you can see, it's rough. Overall, you can see by looking at this page that the site is fairly fairly close. The inspiration for the site actually came from a couple of different places. The number one thing that I was inspired to create this site after was a picture that I had taken of a Christmas tree that was out of focus. That sounds really odd, but if you look along the top of the page, you see those circles, and those are actually come from this. This is the page that I'm talking about, the kind of out of focus circles, the multiple colors behind the main in focus image. That's what gave me the inspiration for the header design. And then the grid with the pictures in it was this picture right here. For some reason, I absolutely love this picture. I love the grid design that it comes from. This is one of the 2 websites that I go to get inspiration. hankayat.com is awesome. It's really easy to look through the hundreds and hundreds of different galleries that they have showing the best that the web has to offer. The other one that I go to is Smashing Magazine. They're not as into example, and they're more into topics of discussion. Like this article I just read the other day is Persuasion Triggers in Web Design. And I'm going to navigate to the site. You can find it if you want to at escape.faithfamilychurch.com, escape.faithfamilychurch. So here's the site. At the top, you see the round dots that were inspired by the out of focus Christmas tree, along with the grid menu. If you mouse over one of the buttons, where it's like more about escape in the upper left corner, you know that's a button, A, because your mouse changes, but B, because the graphic behind it changes to highlight one of the things that we talked about in our meeting that they wanted to highlight. Upcoming events is the same. See that is the picture of the youth ministry from the balcony, and as you can see, it really does match the feel of the site. It's very industrial, with gray everything, but then splashes of color, and that's really exactly what this website does. It matches it real well. When I was attempting to do this grid menu at the top, the first thing that popped into my head was it looks like a table, so I'll put it in a table. And I created 8 images, all the exact same size, and I put them in 8 cells in a 4x2 pattern, 4 cells in a row, 4 cells in a row. But for some reason, no matter what I did, I could not get those table cells to lay out correctly in IE 6 and 7. It just wouldn't work. And so I scrapped that whole idea because that's an important segment. That's 25% of the browser usage comes from those 2 browsers. So I swapped it out, and what I ended up doing, I should have just done this in the first place. I don't know what I was thinking, but I did 8 images, 8 image tags with a line break after the 4th, and that's literally it. And each image has a border of 3 pixels solid white. And the second issue that I ran into, pop back into the PowerPoint here, was the footer menu not lining up. You would navigate to a page, and if the content wasn't tall enough to make the page go from the top of your screen to the bottom of your screen, the footer floated, and you got part of the body background behind the footer. And I really didn't want that. I didn't like that at all. I thought it was ugly. I thought it was unprofessional. And so what I ended up doing, after hours of trying to figure it out, here's exactly how I ended up doing it. These are the style sheet elements that you need to manipulate to do this. What I ended up doing was giving the body and HTML elements a height of 100% with a 0 margin and a 0 padding. That way, no matter how high that content is, it goes from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen with no margin or padding on the sides or the top and bottom. In every .aspx page, and I'll get to why I use that instead of HTML in a couple of seconds, there's a form that goes right inside the body tag, and so that needed to have a minimum height of 100% as well. Otherwise, if I set it to height 100%, what ended up happening was it would cut off the bottom of the content. And so same with the wrapper, I set that minimum height to 100%. That way, if the content was taller than the screen, it would flow down below the end of the screen. If I didn't set that to 100%, it always kept the footer right at the bottom of the screen. The subpage content wrapper is actually what's around the content itself. In the subpage, I set the padding bottom on that to 95 pixels. The reason I did that was because that's where the footer was going to go, was within that 95 pixels. Because if you look down at the bottom, the subpage footer wrapper and the subpage footer, I don't know why I included subpage content in there, just ignore that. But the subpage footer wrapper and the subpage footer have a height of 85 pixels. But what's interesting about them is that the subpage footer wrapper, the outside wrapper div around the footer, has a position absolute with a bottom of 0% or 0 pixels. That means that that footer is going to stick to the bottom of the body hard at 0 pixels, and it's going to go 85 its height up. And so the bottom padding and the height of the subpage footer had to match. That way the footer didn't cover up any of the subpage content. So that was exactly how I got that fixed. And here's the end result of it. You see that the footer is down at the bottom of the page now, rather than floating up 10 pixels or whatever you set the padding underneath. the picture so it doesn't look dumb. It looks real professional. And you don't even notice that that code is there if the content's tall enough. It's only for when it's not. And the other thing I struggled with was there are some things I just can't do in CSS and HTML. You just can't. And so I decided I needed to add some server-side programming, and that's the reason I had to change the extension from .html to .aspx, because I needed some server-side programming to help control some of the elements on the page. And the first one and the most important one was this contact form. I love contact forms for websites instead of just an email link, because email links cause spam. And what I wanted to do was I wanted the email that arrived in the inbox of the person who's getting this email, I wanted it to be formatted so it wasn't hard to read. And I've used PHP emailers before, I've used HTML and JavaScript emails before, and they just don't do a good job. And so I created this form right here, and it took this data right here and used this code. And in the upper left you see a text file called webmailbody.txt, and what that is it's just a basic text file, and I created it. That's exactly how I want the information to arrive in the person's, who's receiving the email, in their inbox. And it's that format, it's that line spacing, it's those line breaks, everything. And that's how I wanted it to arrive in their email. And on the right you see the code behind the C# that's used to send that email. And here's the email that it sends out. This is the actual email that I received in my inbox, and when I was testing this is exactly what that email ends up looking like. And so it works really well. It's easy to read, it's easy to test, and within a week this will also get added to a database, which is something that I needed C# for as well. The other reason I love C# is this right here. This is the 404 error page that I created. I just wanted to have a little bit of fun. Instead of having like a 404, this page is not found error, I decided to make a joke, try and make people laugh, because it broke probably because I'm an idiot. And so that's what they'll see if they see a 404 error, and that's part of the C#. Anytime it goes supposed to go to a 404 error, it redirects there. Some other problems that I had when I was creating this page were the use of HTML strict basically made the page blow up. And the reason it made the page blow up was because there are some things that I needed to do with some C# code that just wouldn't validate. I really wanted to use HTML5. But I couldn't. Every Internet Explorer except for IE9 Beta doesn't even recognize the HTML5 doc type, and so that didn't work at all. It wouldn't have worked at all. So I decided to use HTML transitional. Some of the things that didn't validate were in the upper left, on every single page there's a JavaScript element at the end. Because this page is 1358 pixels wide. It's really, really wide. So if you've got a 1280 by 1024 monitor or below, without this piece of code right here, the right side of the page would get cut off and it wouldn't be centered on the screen. So what that code does is it says it finds the page width of 1358, and if the screen width is less than the page width, it centers the content on your screen, so it cuts off the two outside edge margins rather than some of the content. The less than tag inside that if statement didn't validate because the W3C validator thought that was the beginning of a tag, and it couldn't figure out what the 1358 tag was, so it didn't validate. The next thing that didn't validate was, like I said, every single ASPX page has to be wrapped in a form, and that form has a tag that's name, and that tag wasn't validating. And then of course every single link where I had a target equals attribute on it, because I wanted it to open in a new window or a new tab, that didn't validate at all under HTML strict. It hated that, and so it was kicking back errors there, so it just didn't validate, so I had to switch. Some of the things that didn't validate even in HTML transitional were goofy. There were two of them. The first one was the link to the Facebook group for Escape Youth Ministry includes an &V, and so what the W3C validator was looking for was, okay, so now we've got an escape character because we have the ampersand, and it couldn't figure out what the &v equals info was, and it was confused, and so that didn't validate. The other thing that didn't validate, which kind of surprised me, and I'm not entirely certain why, but for some reason it just doesn't, is the embed tag and the object tag, and there were a bunch of attributes inside that embedded YouTube video that just wouldn't validate, which really isn't a surprise. Dr. Weinstein said that would happen to do that. So as you can see, the page is functional. Like I said, you can see it at escape.faithfamilychurch.com. It will be launched and live to the full public within a week at escapeyouth.net. So as you can see, it's ready to rock and roll. Hopefully that you guys like it. It's from my heart, and it is inspired by random things. Talk to you guys later.